Gettysburg Museum of History Studios.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this special live edition of AG Today. Today, we are talking about something that we've talked about before on this show. But every time we've talked about it with someone of some authoritative stature, it's always been somebody that works for the National Park Service. We never really had any historians on, certainly not any historians who are far more intelligent than I am and much better with their words. And so I said, why don't we do that? And then, I don't know, a couple weeks after I thought I need to do that, Dr. Timothy Orr wrote an article, and it made the rounds. And I go, finally, somebody who is impassioned yet didn't lose his mind like I do when I get my passions up about things, and then I can't talk and I just sound like an animal. So before we start, though, I want to say a couple of things. Though a little disclaimer here: I like to be fair on this show when we talk about things. I'm interested in getting to the bottom of things. I'm not interested in one side winning or another, per se. And I always want to give equal time on my platform to whoever wants it, especially when there's a controversial issue like this. I think it makes it more interesting. And also, in my old age, I'm learning that nothing is black and white anymore. So we've had the park on numerous times. Steve Sims has been on a couple times. We've talked about this. Jason Martz has been on a few times. We've talked about this. Every opportunity I get to publicly question someone who works for the Park Service about the Beavers, I do, because I know you all are interested in it in various ways, and I figure we can address some of the things, especially that I see on social media, people say, whatever, and now we can ask somebody who works for the park. I have offered or extended an invitation to Chris Heister since she took the job, but she has declined coming on, and so there's that. So today we have, and I'm going to kind of play devil's advocate here. This isn't a park bashing show. So at least I will try to play the other side and represent those points as best I possibly can, even though I don't necessarily agree with them. So it's going to be a challenge for me. But our guest of honor today is Dr. Timothy Orr, and he is, where's the name of the article here? Sorry, Tim. Tim, welcome, by the way. Oh, I've got to turn you up there. Sorry about that. Sorry, Tim. Say hi again.
Thanks for having me, everyone.
You're very welcome. You have a blog called Tales from the Army of the Potomac, and on Friday, September 6th, you put out 3 Men Killed Above Water. That's the article we're talking about today. So welcome to you, Tim. And also a longtime friend of the show, back for her 6th or 8th time, I don't know, maybe 3rd or 4th. Dr. Jennifer Murray. Jen, welcome.
Thank you, Matt.
You're welcome. Pull that mic really close up to you. I mean, that's like one of those, you got to really yell into it or swallow it. And for the first time ever, after years and years of begging, pleading, coaxing, cajoling, prodding, and other words, Mike Waricher of the famous Mike Waricher, what do you call it?
It's Michael Waricher's Gettysburg Perspective.
Yeah, I almost said
a
mouthful.
Yeah.
It is a mouthful, but it's a great page, and you've provided us with some pictures that I was able to string together that we'll look at a little later. Actually, you know what? Let's do that now. So this is going to be kind of complicated. By the way, the wonderful Cindy is in the back there. She's running the board, and this is kind of complicated today because we have Tim joining us on Google Meeting. So, and we actually can see him. But first, what I'm going to do, Cindy, is I'm going to show everybody the video that we have here, and so go ahead. You can go back over there, and let's watch this now, and you'll see from 1937 on. Here we go. Okay. That's not really last week. That's Lake Havasu. But I wanted to just share that with everybody so that you can kind of see what we're talking about there. So let's first start with this. Tim, here's a sentence or two that struck me, not struck me, but I want to start with here. You say, I am writing this post in 2024. The time has come for this quote unquote last resort to, in my opinion, this should have been the first course of action taken by the National Park Service. Go into what you're talking about there, and what compelled you to write this blog post.
Well, let me start with the latter point first. What compelled me to write? The main thing that always, compels me to write about the Army of the Potomac is my fondness for the men who served. Right, they're never far from my mind, and as a point of fact, I worked as a park ranger at Gettysburg for 8 consecutive summers back in the late 1990s, early 2000s. Some of the best years of my life were spent leading people around the battlefield in the footsteps of the soldiers who fought there. So the memories of leading these tours has kind of stayed with me throughout my adult life. And so even though I can't be on Gettysburg in person these days, I always try to do my very best, to tell their stories as best I can. And so what compelled me first and foremost were the memories of the men, right?
Right.
The second thing that, of course, drove me is the destruction of the ground between Devil's Den and Little Round Top by the damming that these beavers have done to Plum Run. And, for people who live in Gettysburg, I imagine it has looked like a very slow change over time that is probably not really perceptible until it's kind of
too late,
so large, and then you have people fishing in the pond, and you kind of realize how ridiculous it has become.
Right.
But for me, my visits to Gettysburg are maybe once every year if I'm lucky, and so I kind of see the damage that has been done in leaps and bounds. And my last visit, which was summer of 2024, I was shocked at how bad the situation had become. How big what we call Lake Crawford derisively has become. And I was just flabbergasted that there had not been any sort of news from the National Park Service about how they were going to repair this damage, curtail the flooding, and make sure that some of the monuments and roadways remain accessible to visitors, right? And I would have thought it would be top priority because they've been doing a ton of work trying to improve the landscape of Little Round Top so that visitors can more easily access it. And so those two things started it out, and then maybe the final ingredient was a show that I watched recently. It's called Last Week Tonight, hosted by John Oliver. And if you've ever seen this show, he does these kind of long 20-minute segments that are really deep dive on specific topics. And he had a program on Hawaiian culture, I guess, in recent times. And one of the main points of this episode was the story of how armed forces bases and posts have taken over certain parts of the Hawaiian Islands, and kind of an outgrowth of Cold War needs. And they've been on these locations for quite some time. And many of the native Hawaiians would like to see these lands returned to them. And there was one element of this where there was a specific valley that the Hawaiians held sacred. It's where some of the first Hawaiians came, and ancestors of these first Hawaiians would like to have access to the valley. But, the Army kind of so far has steadfastly refused to relinquish this ground. And then when they have to offer tours to the native Hawaiians, it's a very kind of strict, kind of guided walk that makes sure that they don't go into any dangerous parts of the Army post. And after watching this and kind of feeling some sympathy for the Hawaiians and their plight, they couldn't access this sacred ground. I had kind of a moment of cynicism where I kind of scoffed and I say, well, good luck getting your valley back. In Gettysburg, one of the considered most hallowed places in North America, we can't even remove a family of beavers. Right.
Right.
And so that was the last straw for me. And I thought, well, if I'm going to make a message that we need to fight for ground that we deem historically significant anywhere across the world, we at least need to make a fight for it in one of the most well-preserved Civil War battlefields, Gettysburg. So that compelled me to write this blog post called 3 Men Killed Above Water, which is kind of a summary of 3 lives of Union soldiers who were mortally wounded on ground that is now flooded or is adjacent to being flooded. And so it's just a tale of like who these men are, because I thought one of the only ways we can make visitors care for the ground, care about what the ground looks like, is to make visitors respond to the stories of men who died there, make them care about the men. So I selected 3 individuals, all men who were, again, mortally wounded fighting on July 2nd, 1863. And I kind of looked, I had several criteria for who I picked. I wanted to have, number 1, pictures of them so we can kind of see their faces. Number 2, have like a primary document that was associated with them. And then number 3, that they all received their mortal wounds on that ground. And so I collected these 3 stories and then told their tales, and then told the tale of the problem of the beavers. And that became the substance of the blog post.
So very smart, by the way, I think, because I think that is the point that a lot of people in the anti-beaver crowd, the pro-history crowd, I call us, because they're not anti-beavers. They're cute and they whack things with their tails and they chew trees down with their buck teeth. Like, you know, they're cute, but they, why can't we move them away? Why can't we have why couldn't they have foreseen this problem and headed it off at the pass instead of waiting for it to become just honestly, it's symbolic of a lot of other things, I think, to the people who love going to Gettysburg National Military Park. There is a sense among the public, and you can see this on Facebook and all the comments and anywhere. And Jen and Mike, jump in on this if you want. And Mike, you even kind of cover this stuff on your Facebook page.
I do. Yeah.
Yeah. The people feel that the park is less accessible to them. And whether or not, I'll give you an example that I have, personally, people know that, we have the whole thing where our Get Out of the Car tour season came abruptly to an almost end because we had to come into compliance with permits after 5 years of doing them without hearing word one about them. And the argument is, well, it's not a new regulation. It's been on the books forever. And my argument back is, then why weren't you enforcing it forever? Why is it all of a sudden? So there's a choice there. You chose not to, and now you choose to. And you don't have to make these choices. And people having tours with a licensed battlefield guide, by the way, following that law, are not really hurting the park. But they had such a great opportunity. If I'm going to put my conspiracy theory hat on, and believe me, I am going to defend the park, so don't worry. But if I'm going to put my conspiracy theory hat on here, my tinfoil hat, they had a great opportunity with Little Round Top's rehabilitation because it was a very visible public thing that we could see, the erosion at Little Round Top. Sure. And they can point to it, and they love the phrase, "We're loving it to death." I believe Latcher coined that phrase, didn't he, when they first... Right. And they're still using it to this day because it's like, it's cute, but it's also, in the Little Round Top case, it was true, but now they point to Little Round Top. Well, look at Little Round Top. We have to make sure that we don't love the rest of the park to death. Well, how come we haven't before in 160 years? Why haven't we? Why is it only Little Round Top that we love to death? Because it's very popular. People want to see it. Sure. And people will go anywhere they want to go on Little Round Top. They're not doing that in other places. When we do our Get Out of the Car tours, we're like the only people that go to that spot for like years. So it's not like we're trampling over that. Plus, we have a licensed guide with us. He knows not to let us walk through crops, things like that. I understand there are people that slip through the cracks, right? But my point is that when you take all these things and then you look at the Lake Crawford, and it was worse before. We have to give them credit here. Like, it was 2 lakes. It was twin lakes.
A north and a south.
Right, a northern lake and a southern lake.
Yeah.
And the southern lake was starting to surround the 40th New York. And our team Mozart shirt, which was our pro history shirt, the logo was the Mozart regiment going bow down like the Titanic, and the soldier on top of it is sitting on top kind of like this, and the beavers are evilly looking out at him through the water. And because that's what you couldn't go and access that monument if you wanted to.
Not easily.
No, you need waiters for that.
Yeah.
So would you agree, though, you're more active on, I can't stand Facebook. I can't stand any of this stuff. You're more active on it. You see all the comments people make. Am I right that people are getting a sense that the accessibility to their park that their taxes pay for is very restricted now?
I do hear that, yes, and I feel the same way. When I'll go to Gettysburg, many times I will get out on foot with my camera because I like to take the photos, and I will seek out the places where there are not people. So,
sure, which is any good photographer or videographer would do.
Right.
So you're not going to interfere with people because you don't want them interfering with you.
That's right. I don't want them in my photos.
Exactly.
So. But, I could walk almost anywhere I wanted. There used to be a nice sort of social trail network that had been built throughout different areas of the park. I would use them. I would get out into the areas even beyond that. That's where the best shots are, the best angles are that people don't see. It's become very difficult now. I think you'll notice that a lot of the areas on the southern end of the battlefield are being rather overgrown, which would disincentivize people to get out of their cars and try to thrash their way through that.
Yeah. The slaughter pen, for example, looks like the jungles of Vietnam now.
It's impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, but this is another point. Things like Atchison Rock, for example.
Yeah.
People want to see that. This is something the soldiers left behind. This is a connection to the past. And they don't want us going and looking at those. They don't want guides taking people to see them, even if they ask.
Yes.
Doesn't mean the guides obey.
There used to be a trail that you could follow, a fairly decent trail that you would walk back the gravel Waricher Altoff Lane, and you could find the trail to the Atchison Rock pretty easily. I've not tried it in recent years because I know it's
verboten.
Yeah. You're going to be swarmed with ticks or law enforcement officers.
Ticks. I'm more afraid of the cops. They've got guns. So you do get that same sense that so to me, Lake Crawford is symbolic of you can't touch, but the beavers can, or nature can run wild, which I guess is, it's supposed to. It's nature. But like this, I guess let's get to this, and I'm going to pose this to each one of you, but Jen, I want you to take it since you haven't really spoken yet. What is the purpose of Gettysburg National Military Park?
Great question, Matt. I'm glad you asked that.
Thank you.
So I brought a couple of things along that we could use as a point of departure. And I'll start with can you hear me okay?
Yeah, just point it at your mouth. Okay, there you go.
With GBMA, which is established in 1864, so the first preservation entity of the Gettysburg battlefield. So I thought we'd rewind the clock to 1864.
Good.
And the first sentence says, the preservation of the battlefield at Gettysburg, with its natural and artificial defenses, in the exact form and condition they present in the battles of the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd days of July last, is the purpose of the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association. And it goes on, of course, but I think the first sentence is a useful point of departure.
Okay, but now, in fairness, that is not the federal government.
That's
right?
True.
It's not the National Park Service. Didn't exist at the time. What was that, April of 64 that came from?
That's true. So
okay, so take us through the evolution here.
So the National Park Service acquires Gettysburg in 1933 as it's transferred from the U.S. War Department.
Now, does the War Department change the purpose of the GBMA?
By and large, not. It's still preserved as a memorial for the men who fought here in July of 1863. So to come to the present day, and if your listeners are interested in this, you can Google search Gettysburg National Military Park mission statement or something called the foundation document, and it will come up. And if you scroll onto the very first page, there's this nice, succinct mission statement that reads as follows. This is today.
Mm-hmm.
The purpose of Gettysburg National Military Park is to preserve, protect, and interpret for this and future generations the resources associated with the 1863 Battle of Gettysburg during the American Civil War, the Soldiers' National Cemetery, and their commemorations. So,
And that was, repeat what that's from again, just one more time.
that's from the foundation. It's called the foundation document. So
Okay.
basically, that's the management statement
From
that-
1933.
from today.
Oh, from today.
In 2024 that the National Park Service here at Gettysburg is to adhere to. So, and this is what we can talk about, and I'd be curious to hear what Tim has to say about this too. To me, the negligence of the Plum Run Valley and the fact that the National Park Service has allowed the beaver situation to get as bad as it is, to me, means that they have abdicated their mission to preserve, protect, and interpret for this and future generations the resources associated with the 1863 Battle of Gettysburg.
Now, is there anywhere in anything, any documents that say they also, or that resources also includes wildlife and plant life?
Well, if you look on that document, and I hope some people are curious enough to really look at the language of this, they itemize resources and values. And the number one resource that is prioritized is the battlefield landscape. And number two is the commemorative landscape. So
And they're prioritized in that order.
number one, right, battlefield landscape. So to me, and I think you and I talked about this before, I think too that the beavers have become symbolic of a larger failure of landscape management at Gettysburg. And maybe it's dangerous to equate the beavers with the fact that, in my opinion at least, the Park Service has abdicated that mission. But that's how I look at the beaver equation.
Tim, how about you? What do you say?
Yeah, I'm largely in concurrence with what Jen has to say, that I think it is, number one, yes, symbolic of a larger problem, and also kind of, either willful or unanticipated ignorance of what their mission actually is, right? And I do kind of wonder if part of the problem is that the Park Service has kind of lost sight of what kind of historical message they're trying to send to begin with, right?
Well, hold up. Let me go back real quick. You said willful or what?
Or accidental.
Accidental.
Right?
All right. So give me an example of willful. Like, what do you mean willful? What are they doing purposely? Why are they?
They're purposely prioritizing the natural resources over the historical ones.
And why would
right?
they? Why?
Well, I don't know. You'd have to ask them about
Now,
that.
when we
the
say
argument could be that it is non-confrontational, right?
with nature,
With nature.
when we say them, we're not really talking about the administration here at Gettysburg, or are we talking about their bosses?
That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure I could give a educated answer on that. But
Jen,
my
can
general
you?
thought is that
Do you have an idea, Jen?
Do you want to let Tim?
I'm going to let him finish. I just want to know if you can, before we move on.
Oh, I have a thought on this, but I'll
Okay, all right,
wait.
all right,
I'll
all right.
hold on until Tim.
All right.
Tim
I was just
finishes.
looking for a simple yes or no, Jen. But
I
okay.
have a thought.
All right, go ahead, Tim. I'm sorry.
yeah, and I don't want to put in a hypothesis that is not based on any kind of, qualitative or quantitative evidence. But my suspicion is that it does have a lot to do with the administration as it currently is. And sometimes people fall into these administrative positions and their specialty is not necessarily how to preserve historical resources, but how to preserve natural ones. And they fall back into something that they know rather than something that they need to learn.
Okay.
And I don't want to say anything more than that because
Sure.
I've never had conversations with the new administration.
Right.
But one of the possibilities could just be that the outlook of the people who are running the show at Gettysburg currently prioritize the natural resources because it's a non-confrontational stand to take.
One
right?
would think.
Yeah.
But
because
clearly there's a confrontation.
everyone loves nature, right? And you don't want to be accused of abusing the beavers, right?
Sure.
And so one of the ways you can kind of get around that is just by letting them flourish.
Okay. Now, what would the accidental? Like, give me an example. Accidental. Are they just bumbling around, and is it incompetence? What do you mean accidental?
Well, I guess I would mean accidental in the sense that they are focused on other issues at the time, well-meaning ones, and then because of the allocation of resources, just simply ignore this problem, hoping that it'll go away. Right.
Okay.
So it's simply they don't know how detrimental the beavers could have gotten, and they kind of let the problem try to handle itself. And now it's reached a point where, again, it's a massive lake and tons of reeds all the way around, obstructing the visitor's view, and of course potentially threatening the monuments and the roadways that people use to access the Plum Run Valley. So merely kind of ignoring the problem, hoping it would go away.
But now that's highly unlikely, though, because we have a biologist on staff, and the now superintendent when she was deputy superintendent, is a biologist, and she was deputy superintendent when this happened. So it can't be that they don't know what beavers do.
Yeah, and I guess that's why it would be very nice if she could be on your show to answer these questions herself, right?
Well, the invitation stands. I sat and talked with her. I actually found her to be very nice and delightful. I had a nice conversation with her, and I told her the same thing I told Steve Sims before he came on the first time. And I was like, people have an opinion of you based on your behavior, not because they've heard from you. So come on the show and let them see that you're a human being, and explain your reasons why. But she demurred. She said, I'm not really into that type of thing. So, and, I don't want to make somebody, how hard it was to get Mike on the show? Like how many years I've had to beg this guy.
You just put me on the promo and I was on the spot, right?
You had no choice. You were going to disappoint. Okay. So go ahead, Tim. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. We are actually kind of asking a very tall order of the Park Service, because we're no one wants the beavers to be hurt in their removal. We want to live trap them, and live trapping a beaver is a very difficult thing. They're very trap shy, so asking them to do this, to humanely move the beavers to a different location where they will be safe and where it'll give Plum Run Valley a chance to kind of restore itself, will probably take some time, maybe a year or more. But part of the reason why I had suggested in the blog post that this should have been their first course of action was because it was going to probably take a while to correct.
Yeah.
And now, even if they start taking action tomorrow, it might still be like 2026 before we see any sign of improvement. Because I haven't heard how many beavers there are. For one, like it could be a very large lodge of them, and it might take some time to corral them all, move them safely, and it's going to take an environmental survey and everything. It's not right. Do overnight. No,
nothing is overnight with the government. It's all a long process. So, okay, what was the point you were going to make before that you didn't want to interrupt? Do you remember?
I was just going to add to your comment about the park superintendent, but I agree with what Tim said. This is a tall order, and these criticisms they originate from a place of profound interest in Gettysburg and profound respect for the men, at least in the Army of the Potomac, in this particular instance, who fought there. Yeah. So our criticisms they originate from a good place, but I've spent a lot of time studying the administration and superintendents at this battlefield, and it might surprise some of your listeners to know that not all people who manage the Gettysburg battlefield have backgrounds in history. And I profoundly believe that people's backgrounds, say in biology or wildlife and fish sciences specifically, might influence how they look at a particular situation.
Well, sure.
Might influence how they manage something.
Yeah.
That's not meant as a criticism per se, right?
Right.
It speaks to maybe why we are in this particular situation in 2024.
Now, but this started with the previous superintendent. Right. So, and he's a colonel. So
right, with a degree, I think, in
I don't remember
engineering from West Point.
Okay, he drives a train.
That's important. Herman Haupt would be proud.
Yes. Not that kind of engineer, folks.
Right.
Speaking of the three men, let me tell you about one of them, Second Lieutenant Charles Sullivan McCobb. Here's what happened to him when the ground was relatively dry. At Gettysburg, McCobb was hit by a rifle ball in the abdomen. His friend, First Lieutenant Carlisle, ordered several men to carry him to the rear. McCobb begged them to leave him behind, but the men refused. Risking their lives, they carried the wounded lieutenant across a mile of rough ground. McCobb survived only a few hours. He made it to a nearby field hospital, probably the Michael Fry farm, where he died, succumbing either that night or early the next day. He was 24 years old. Tender 24 years old. Not very long on this earth. And the ground that he died on is now submerged. Okay, so what do you say, Tim, to people who stand? I like the analogy you use that beavers are nature's bulldozers.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking about it that night. It came out with a listener who, when we went out to, it was lunch. We went and had lunch the next day, and I said, "Did you read it?" He goes, yeah, I read it. And I brought that up. I said how much I liked that analogy, and he goes, "Yeah, I don't know, because they're natural. It's natural." And I was like, okay, it's still destructive.
Yeah, and that's kind of the point I was trying to make, is that, I love nature as much as anyone. I want to see plenty of green space and wildlife flourishing wherever is possible. But I think one of the things that we equate with the word natural is that it is always beneficial.
Right.
And we
It's
have to
not.
recognize that sometimes nature can be destructive, wantonly destructive, and remind ourselves that nature does not care about our thoughts or feelings about a place.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
And we have to kind of square ourselves with that if we truly care about the legacy of the past and learning from it, then we're going to have to actually sometimes push back on nature. And I'm not saying we need to be destructive with it, but we definitely need to
manage it,
limit it, and hedge it and corral it. And I'm going to tell you one of the reasons why I think this is so important. And that is because of the experience that I had as a ranger at Gettysburg. And I know that Jen, who was a ranger with me during those years, will agree with this, is that a battlefield is one of the best places to teach people about the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
It is not books. It is not documentaries. I wish it was books, because all the time I spent researching and writing. It is not podcasts. It's not classrooms.
What?
It is battlefields.
Uh-huh.
And I will tell you why. Because when visitors stand on the ground, they get into this receptive state where they are like a sponge, and they will listen and ingest anything you tell them, right?
Absolutely.
And they become, it's a weird moment that is indefinable, but when you see it as a park ranger, and I hope there are many other park rangers out there listening, it is just a magical moment.
Mm-hmm.
Because they are contemplating the drama of the place and connecting it across the vast spectrum of American history all the way up to their own lives. But you can only get that moment if they can stand upon the ground. So if we let the ground go away, if we let it go underwater, or we let actual mechanical bulldozers come in and put in a parking lot, then we lose that opportunity to teach on that site. And that's my argument for why this is so supremely important.
Where did you stand on the casino issue?
Well, I was against it.
How about you, Jen?
I was against it.
How about you, Mike?
Yeah, same.
You guys are silly.
Fun
I was
Steelers.
for it, but I'm glad you guys won. I've said this to a friend of mine, Nick Redding, because he was involved in that. And I was like, I hated you guys at the time, but I'm so glad you won, because I was, young and full of piss and vinegar. But I want to know where those people are, though. And again, I think you're right. Like, we look at man's bulldozers and we go evil, bad. And the casino wasn't even it was going to be miles, not like 100 miles, but miles from the battlefield, right? Here it's on the battlefield. And I'll bet you a lot of those people go down and go, "Oh, look, I saw a beaver." Like, they go in the hopes of finding a beaver. And I don't know. Like it's just, I guess there's just like, I don't like the destruction of the battlefield, whether it's man or beast doing it. And, you know, to your point, Tim, about going and standing there, I remember when they started clearing 20 years ago or whenever that was, when they started clearing the wood lots and tree lines that weren't there in 1863, which is, by the way, what people mean when they say return it to or keep it at its 1863 appearance. I know some people go, well, what do you want? Dead bodies all over the place? No, nobody's ever said that's what they want. Nobody wants a staged battlefield. They want to see what the soldiers saw landscape-wise. And I think people who come out with that, what do you want, dead soldiers? They know that, but they're purposely misrepresenting the other person to get them defending against that. Anyway, when they cleared the woods between Devil's Den and the Slider Farm and Warfield Ridge and everything you can see there, and you could finally see, and now I understood, it's the Confederates weren't coming out of the trees. Now that the trees are gone, I can see they were coming across wide open fields. I can go and visit the Timbers Farm, which I couldn't do before. And I can connect with this place in ways that I hadn't been able to do when I started coming here, in ways people in the decades before they started clearing, while it was all wild, weren't able to do. And now that seems to be going away again. And I just, what are your thoughts on that? Like, forget about the beavers for a second, but overall, the way it's kind of going back to the wild.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of have a personal connection to this. You know, one of my absolute favorite regiments of the Army of the Potomac is the 2nd United States Sharpshooters, which fights down there at the Slider Farm. You know, because that's how I kind of got into Civil War history, was through, you know, reenacting, which was a popular thing, and reenacted with the sharpshooter units that were in my neck of the woods. And, you know, we would like to visit the monuments that were down at the Slider Farm. And for years, I couldn't understand anything of the action because it was covered in a thick canopy of trees. And then when the National Park Service finally cleared the area between the foot of Big Round Top and Warfield Ridge, it opened up that section of the battlefield, and I really understood it, right? Yeah. And of course, we always have to keep in mind that it's not just the reduction of forest, but also the planting of trees as well, right? Several orchards have been planted. Oak Grove was restored. So it's not just about taking trees out, but actually putting some in.
Sure, that's a good point.
All part of that plan. And yeah, I, like you, was kind of disappointed in recent years when that view that I had finally gotten after like decades of trying to understand the sharpshooters has now also been kind of taken over by these tall kind of marsh grasses that are now covering kind of the Devil's Den area. So it does seem to be like it's going back to the way it was. So I don't, again, know what the Park Service has in terms of a management plan going into the 21st century, but it seems like they have no idea of how to continue all the work that was done in the late 90s and early noughties to improve the battlefield to make it look like it did in 1863.
Well, I know money is an issue. Somebody was telling me that they when they cleared it, there was never an endowment started to maintain it over the years, but it was maintained for like 20 years, so I don't know where they got that money, but I know that their budget keeps shrinking. But then again, supposedly there was an endowment for Culp's Hill's clearing, and that's not been maintained. So I don't know. It's interesting. All right, Mike. Well, give me some of your thoughts.
Follow up on that a little bit.
I just want to know what you're thinking.
All four of us were here during that time period. I was in my early stages of becoming a Gettysburgite and finding myself on the battlefield a lot with the camera, and I recorded a lot of these scenes as they happened.
Oh, really?
And I'll look back on those photos on occasion today, and more so of late, remembering what it did look like, what a wonder it was, and how it shrank the battlefield, I think.
Yes.
It was a remarkable achievement. Yeah. I wish they could have maintained it.
Yeah, I do too.
But it slowly has come back, and it's worse now, to my opinion, than it was then, and we're losing other parts of the field as well.
What you think? What is worse now than it was then?
I think the slaughter pen is back to being as bad as it was. I think we've lost
it's
the area between Bennings Knoll and the slaughter pen is going. You can't see the Elephant Rock anymore, let alone get back to it. You can't find the Flag Rock.
That's true. That area has gone to pot, and I would say it's almost like 75-80% back to what it was before they cleared it.
Sure.
Which didn't take very long, by the way. That's the thing. And that's got to be the tough part for the park, is keeping up with the speed of nature.
Right.
Like, she grows pretty quick. You give her a chance to grow, and she's sprouting up, and a year or two go by, and you got some pretty tall saplings, and pretty soon you got a whole forest.
It was a few short years before you were starting to lose it again already.
Yeah,
and,
right.
Yeah.
So it's got to be a tough job. It's 6,000 acres. You got people to manage. You got interpretation. You got all these things that you have to do here with a dwindling staff and a dwindling budget. So I get it. I understand that. Now, the foundation, though, is there to help them with that. So if they wanted to do these things, if they wanted to keep up with the clearing, they could have asked the foundation to help them fund it.
Public-private relations, yeah.
Yeah.
Why can't we have someone, find some people to help sponsor the preservation clearing of the battlefield at Gettysburg? We've already done it.
Exactly, and I think a lot of people agree with Tim, and I think we all agree with Tim, that when you clear sightline obstructions like woodlots or whatever, and you also plant things like orchards, like the peach orchard. I think at least for a while it was bigger than what it used to be. It was, but it wasn't as big as it was during the battle, but it was larger. They expanded it out a little bit. So you get an idea of what obstacles soldiers have when they're fighting a battle, right? Or don't have lines of sight. You can see them coming. It makes it all so much more understandable if you can see it too. And if we want people to come here and learn as an outdoor classroom, then you got to make it so that they can see what the hell they're learning. It's like if everybody in the front row in your classroom wore, like Abraham Lincoln hats, stovepipe hats, and you couldn't see the blackboard, and yet the teacher's yelling at you, well, what do you need to see the blackboard for? Because that's basically the answer to the people that want the trees to come back. What do you need to see what they saw? You can't look at a map? You can't figure it out by reading? Jen Murray, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we're getting to the bigger question about how we manage these places.
And speaking of questions,
right.
717-428, 428-1978, 420-1978. That's the phone number to call, 717-420-1978, if you have any questions or comments. Go ahead.
I think we're getting to a bigger question that's beyond the scope of what you probably want to get into, but it gives us hopefully something to think about, is how these landscapes should be managed. And problems or tensions with cultural and natural resources are not unique to Gettysburg. There are any number of parks who deal with similar issues. Vicksburg has serious erosion problems. If your listeners are fans of Western theater, the Stones River battlefield and some of their trenches are inhabited by groundhogs, which are incredibly detrimental to the entrenchments there. And I think there the Park Service has taken on some mitigation efforts of the groundhogs to preserve those earthworks.
Okay.
And there are policies the National Park Service has to try to make these natural and cultural resources kind of consistent, that they can live, in harmony with one another. Here, the kind of the question is where we find that balance. And I just don't, in my opinion, think that that's struck in a way that favors history and consistent to the landscape and what it was preserved for with the current issue in Plum Run Valley.
Tim?
Yeah, and I think that's the key word, is balance, right? That what we need to do is find a way that the environment and the historical landscape can kind of coexist. And we can definitely reach that point. And I'm not a naive person at all. I know that we will never be able to fully recreate the 1863 landscape, right? It's going to be permanently altered by things that we humans do. We also have to preserve the commemorative landscape, all the monuments. We have to have accessible roads, right, so that people can go out and see these places.
Sure.
We have to have a visitor center. These are all things that are necessary, but at the same time, we can't let one sort of era of history overrun another that is vitally important to us, and we can't let nature itself kind of like encroach upon the mission of the Park Service. So I think it's all a matter of like, it's imbalanced when you see it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And clearly, at least from my observations, there is great imbalance in the Plum Run Valley. And I would have thought it would have been noticed and dealt with before now, but it's gotten to a just ridiculous proportion, right?
Yeah,
And that's why we're here talking about it,
And
right?
I agree with Tim completely on that. And that's the issue, is that it has gotten this far, that it has gotten this imbalanced. And I hope that your viewers, Matt, really look at those photographs and how this area has changed just in the last few years. It's quite significant. And I wanted to share something about beavers. For those who say that the beavers are furry friends, as they were once called by someone in the park management, had a place here in July of 1863. I've not done extensive research on the history of the beavers at Gettysburg, but what I've looked at and chatting with someone who has researched this issue a little bit more, it looks like the beavers were pretty much extinct in this area around 1820.
Really?
Because they were profitable for their herds.
Yeah.
So that's like in 1820. Then, this is a newspaper article from the Gettysburg Compiler in 1936. So fast forward a century plus. May restock Adams Stream with
Beavers.
And the second paragraph says the animals extinct for a number of years in the county are known to have inhabited the stream in this section years ago. So this article in 1936 suggests that beavers, our furry little friends, have not always, to great numbers, lived and thrived in this area. So, I think, because that's an argument that you hear, right? Like, oh, the beavers were there in the summer of 1863. What's so wrong with that? Mm-hmm. And again, this is cursory. I have better things to do with my time than research the demographics of beavers in Adams County. But it looks like around 1820, they became, if not extinct, but at least a little bit more rare. And, that shows us that nature sort of evolves over time. So we're dealing with a relatively kind of unique problem here, I think, but unique in its excess, not unique in how we have to put these two kind of like balance of nature and history again.
Yeah.
And Jen, just so I don't misunderstand you, the 1936 article is suggesting that beavers were purposely restocked by human beings?
Yep.
Or they just... Okay.
Yeah, the Adams County streams are going to be restocked with beavers if a proposal made at the Adams County Fish and Game Association is supported. Right?
Was it?
Yeah. So
do we know if it ever was?
So they were bringing in beavers.
Mercenary beavers. Yeah.
Here in the 1936, which is interesting too. That's just 3 years after the Park Service acquires the battlefield. So
right.
I mean, so the beavers and their demographics of living in this area have their own history. So the fact that they're extinct for a period of time, something to think about. Hopefully, add some complexity to the issue.
That's interesting. That's.
I also think with regard to the Plum Run Valley, this is what we're talking about at the moment is. We pick up from the 1820s where they become extincted, and then we begin
extincted?
Extincted. Maybe I made that up. Maybe it's a word. Who knows?
Well, habitated, extincted. Yeah. You guys are hungry. Go ahead.
But a photographic record then picks up from that period, from the 1860s until today. We see, I think I shared some of these images with you of photos in the Parks Archives that shows beautiful images of the Plum Run Valley. It's a very narrow, meandering stream. There's no brush on the banks of the stream. Mm-hmm. There's no material for the beavers to do their beavering.
Right.
And that carries through into the age of aerial photography and the satellite images that we looked at to kick the show off.
Yeah.
And you don't see any evidence that Plum Run was ever more than a stream you can almost hop across.
Yeah. Right. Well, so let me do this and go to one for a second, if you don't mind, so I can find this video again. I'll show the video. I'll mute the music so that the goofy Larry David-esque music isn't there. Is Cindy awake in the back there? You on one there, Cindy? Oh, that's one. Yeah, there you go. Okay, thank you. All right. So, and caller, I see you're there. So hang on a second. We'll get to you in a moment. All right. Now, let me mute the sound there. And let's take a look here in silence. It's like the Zapruder film. Ready? We're going to watch this. Here we go. Yeah, you can see it almost looks like the landscape of the moon. There's not a lot of vegetation. Now in the 2000s, it's a little greener.
Quality gets a little better.
Yeah. Now, I upped the contrast and stuff to make it so that the everything stands out because some of these images were old and blurry. And then I also blurred what you don't need to look at, obviously, and I made an arrow.
And 2016 seems to be the period where you start to see things grow.
I mean, that is, and then this one here is, look at the size of that thing. That's huge. Huge. And then there's a smaller one down here, too. Now, that was, so here, it was bigger down here in 2021, and then I think they put those beaver deceivers in, if I'm not mistaken.
And to their credit, it is better. You can now access the 40th New York Monument.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there. And then look at the size of that one there. And then so this one up here, Tim, did you see the guy fishing? Fly fishing?
Yes, I saw the video of the fly fisherman.
Yes.
One of the more recent moments that alerted me to how bad the problem had become.
Well, you know what was interesting is I was kind of looking through the CFR, and where did I put it? There is a question. And the question was, for boating, am I required to obtain a permit? It's section, let's see, Title 36. Now, this might, I need to know, I should really, and I did this right before the show, so I could be in error here that this does not apply to national military parks, but I don't know if that's true or not. Part 3, Chapter 1, Part 3, Section 3, I guess. Am I required to obtain a permit to operate a vessel in a park area? We're talking about boats, boating and water use activities. Generally, you are not required to obtain a permit to operate a vessel in a park area. However, in certain circumstances, taking into consideration public safety, protection of park resources, and weather and park management objectives, the superintendent may require a permit for use of a vehicle within a park area, et cetera, et cetera. So then does that mean that not only can I fish in Lake Crawford, but I can bring my kayak or my canoe into Lake Crawford, but I can't skateboard? Which, and by the way, good, because skateboarders are annoying. But is that what I'm reading? Anybody have an idea? I know you guys aren't park officials, so you really...
I mean, you should not be able to fish in the water at all, right? Because you can't take any natural resources out of it.
Well,
so
if
that guy had a permit. I don't know how he got one.
So we had Jason Martz on. He's the communications specialist for the park, and I asked him that. I said, why is this guy allowed to fish? And the answer is that they don't have control over the waterways. Well, first the answer is they respect the laws of the state that they're in. Okay, so Pennsylvania. If that guy has a valid Pennsylvania fishing license, then he can fish there because they can't control the waters. They don't have control over the waterways. And I said, okay, but he was standing on the ground. He wasn't standing in the water. Like he was on a boulder that is on your ground, and you tell us what we can and can't do. We can't picnic on your ground except in specific areas. So why can't you just say you can't stand on our shore, on the shores of mighty Lake Crawford and fish? Why can't you do that? Because here's the other thing is it seems that the park has always had a concern about looking like a recreational park. And to me, fishing is a recreational activity. So what is the difference between, say, rollerblading and fishing?
Well, and if you want to point out, think about how the Park Service manages the deer problem. For years, the National Park Service has culled or thinned the deer herd because they're detrimental to the resource and to farmers' crops and the like, and they donate the meat to different food banks. So how is it that they manage the deer problem in this specific way, but the beaver issue is something that they will continue to let go? And again, and Tim said this, but let's be clear, no one is advocating,
Right.
the anti-beaver people are not advocating a mass slaughtering of beavers,
yeah.
right? We're asking that they be trapped and relocated somewhere else. And it's, it's somewhat
I'm also,
of a shame.
by the way, not advocating you go boating in Lake Crawford, even though apparently you're allowed to.
I mean, so much, well, a lot of stuff that I see online is sort of comical about the beavers, right? We'll make the point about, General Beaver, and then they become kind of funny. Your little picnicking of the beavers, right? There
While
they
holding
are
skateboards.
with their jam and their, cheese and their
Right.
grapes, like you've anthropomorphized them. So they're like these cute little...
It's adorable.
Yeah, and there's all these AI things with the beavers and their union uniforms circulating because we've sort of... They have a very powerful constituency, the beavers do. And I can't quite understand why that is that way, although we live in an incredibly
They're cute.
polarized era from... particularly in an election year, everything
Right.
is very controversial, and the beavers have a very loud constituency. But to me, they are not compatible with the purposes of this battlefield and what the National Park Service, as the steward of those 6,000 acres, is to be doing.
I can tell you though that if I'm to go by our Team Beaver, Team Mozart T-shirt sales, it used to be tied. Like literally, if we sold 11 in a month of one, we sold 11 of the other, right? It was straight down the middle. It's starting, and I think Tim's article is the first legitimate, well thought out criticism of the whole thing that has come out that I think is starting to galvanize people, including people who were pro-beaver. In fact, I got a text message the other day from a friend of mine in Virginia, and he goes, "Okay, I'm anti-beaver now." And I was like, "Wow, what happened?" And he's like, "I was just up there last weekend, and I saw the lake, and that's obscene." And I was like, "All right, welcome to the club." And I gave him a card and a T-shirt and a hat. And now he's part of the anti-beaver crowd. But he agrees too. You don't have to kill them. You just, do it in a humane way, which was offered to the park years ago when it was a smaller problem. And, so yeah, okay. Well, whatever. So let me tell you about another person who died above water there. First Lieutenant Edward Stanley Abbott, Company A, 2nd Battalion, 17th U.S. Regular Infantry. He was mortally wounded on the afternoon of July 2nd, 1863, just as his regiment crossed Plum Run, which is now Lake Crawford. A rifle ball struck him on the right shoulder, flecking off some of the braid from his shoulder insignia. The ball penetrated his flesh, passed through his right lung, and lodged near his spine. He fell to the ground unconscious, but his comrades carried him to the rear. He was awakened at the Michael Fischel Farm, a field hospital for the 5th Corps. On July 7th, he wrote a short letter to his brother. Quote, "Wounded in the breast," he wrote. "Doctor says not mortal. I am at Corps Hospital near Gettysburg. Expect to be in Baltimore in a few days." Lieutenant Abbott did not recover. He died the next day, July 8th, 1863. And he did that all above water. All right, we have a call here, so I'm going to go to the call. This is a little tricky here with the stuff in the back there because we're just going to go right to it. Here we go. Peter Zach is on the phone. He wants to talk about Lake Crawford. Oh, let me turn me off there. Sorry about that. Peter, you're on the air. Or not. All right, let me try this then here. Hold on a second. I don't know if you all knew. Oh, it got disconnected. What a shame. Peter, stick around. We'll get back to you in 1 second here. I'm just going to return you to the queue. All right, so let's get back to what we're talking about here. Mike, give me your thoughts on what we just read about that soldier there.
I'm going to refer to a document here that was part of the 1864 management plan, or whatever you prefer to call it. It's in the preambles and resolutions.
Okay.
I'm going to take these glasses off to read it. And this well sums up what I feel about it. And it says, whereas the citizens of Pennsylvania, of which I am one today, should regard this peculiar emotions of patriotic pride, the battlegrounds which are the eloquent memorials of those grand struggles and triumphs of the arms of the Union, which mark an era from which to date the downfall of the rebellion. I think that's pretty strong statement as part of the reason why we have a battlefield park here today.
You know, you bring up a good point. We like to put so much importance on what the war was about. I mean, to this day, people argue over what the war was about. And I think most Americans will fall on the side of, whatever it was about at the time to the soldiers. Ultimately, what it did was it answered the question of, can you own another person in the United States of America, right?
Right.
And we put so much importance on that, and that we defeated that sin, and many would like to hold it against us still that we had it. But then we let this ground where these guys suffered and died, and it's not like in the movies always where you get hit and you go down and you're dead immediately. Sometimes the lucky ones, that's the way it is. But a lot of these guys, especially the ones shot through the body at these weird angles, some of them lasted days. That's agony. And to say, oh, but the beavers are cute, and let them just run amok down there, I could see how that would bother people.
Right.
Because it bothers me.
It does me as well.
Yeah.
And I've beaten that drum for 3 or 4 years probably on my Facebook page, and I think it's something either you feel it or you don't.
Well, and I think that's the thing. I think when people say, what do you want to do? Put dead soldiers and horses all over the field like it was in 1863. I think those are people that are unfeeling. I think they're too clinical about it. And there's a nastiness to that response, because that's not what anybody is saying, and it. So I don't agree with that. Peter, are you there now?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. How are you?
Okay. Yeah, something's up with your phone lines because I can't hear the show.
Well,
until it's picked up.
I'm so very sorry, Peter. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. Just a heads up. But anyway,
Okay.
So I've been kind of dealing with this for probably over a decade within various federal and state organizations up here. Not per se beavers, but it seems to be that a lot of the effort or concern goes to with nature, and and I think it was 1933 when they consolidated historic parks into with natural parks. But it seems to be that seems to be the main concern more so. It gets more money will be thrown at natural product, researching trees and nature and all that compared to any kind of historic relevant work goes on. So this is kind of like something that I've seen stemming for a long time within parks in general.
Why do you think that is?
It's, I don't know. Well, a part of it I want to say is political.
Yeah.
I've had to deal with people holding money for certain projects, and they'll cry, "Oh, we don't have money," until a certain project comes up, and then all of a sudden the money's there.
Uh-huh.
A lot of backstabbing. A historic park will be asking for a certain amount of money for some kind of restoration project or whatnot.
Well, welcome to the
they'll
United
cry, "We don't
States
have
of
any money."
America, Peter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but then all of a sudden, they'll have a nature park or, just a recreational park. And, we got to replace all the benches and we got to fix the pool, which within a year is going to be probably destroyed anyways from the public screwing around with it and vandalizing it.
Right.
And the thing is too, when like a new supervisor or director comes in, it's like my first question is, what's their background? Where do they come from? And a lot of when a couple of them would come out from out west, like Yellowstone and stuff like that. And I'm like, this isn't going to be good. And sure enough, they got on a historic park, and they're like, why do we need guns around here and all this other stuff? And they're more concerned with putting up signs for plants and trees and nature parks and don't walk on the grass.
Well, and they may do things. And Tim, I realize you can't hear what he's saying, but if there's a question for you, I will ask it for you. This too shall pass, right? Like everything, there were people, I remember when Latcher started clearing the trees, people were up in arms. But I love to jog through in fact, I think one person even said, what?
Including you, right?
Yeah, I love jogging. Yeah, okay. No, but one person even said, I love to rollerblade through there on a website that we all used to go and bitch on. And we were all like, yeah, but this park isn't for rollerblading. This park it's a historical park and everything. And those people who didn't like the clearing of the trees are probably now breathing a sigh of relief because that too shall pass. It had passed. And now we're the ones who have to suffer for 20 years until somebody comes in and says, this is a historic park. You can go to Yellowstone if you want nature. There's a million other places in Adams County you can go if you want raw nature. But this is a historic park, and we're going to restore it so that you can understand what you're looking at. Because if it's just a forest, go ahead. Who was saying that? Go, Peter. Go ahead.
Oh yeah. Well, that's one of my biggest gripes is to separate these two entities. The nature parks and the historic parks, because like I said, the nature parks get all the attention. Oh shit.
So what are you saying then, that they should both be together? Because that's kind of what's happening here.
No. They need to be separated. The historic parks need to be separated from the nature parks because it causes so much conflict. And everybody I know who's, runs or operates one is extremely frustrated. And then on a second note too, I mean, as a veteran, when I see stuff like this, I mean, it pisses me off. Like,
yeah.
This whole aspect of the trees and during 1863 that place was a disaster zone, bombed out, whatever. They don't care, but the veterans don't care about the trees or whatever. It's the essence of it.
Well, and also, there were fewer trees, there were fewer woodlots back then because this land was being used. The trees were needed for wood, for fences, for homes. So yeah, it's a totally different thing. How about Tim?
The purpose.
What do you say to that? Like, we have Peter on the phone. He's a veteran, and he says, as a veteran, like seeing the what's the word I'm looking for?
Neglect.
The neglect. Thank you. The neglect of the park, kind of pisses me off. And that's kind of what you're saying is we need to think about what happened here, who these people were. But what do you say to the people who are like, well, I'm a veteran and I don't really care what you did. I fought for your freedom to make these decisions, blah, blah, blah. There's the other side.
Well, I mean, I would say if you are a vet, it probably behooves you to be kind of on the side of historic preservation because you sacrificed a ton to, uphold the very same kind of freedoms that we enjoy today, right?
Yeah.
And I say, if you ever want to make the case that you want your sacrifice to have meaning, you want the sacrifices of all veterans to have meaning, right? You would want that option, right? And my understanding is that if the Civil War veterans came regularly to Gettysburg, right? They journeyed here. It was their Mecca. It was the place that they came to relive their youth, to think about the friends that they lost. And they came here with their families to show them what they did, right? And this was the place that they could come to make peace with the war, make peace with what they did, right? And I would like to think that all veterans should have that opportunity,
Mm-hmm.
if it's available to them, to go back to the places where they bled out, to go back to the places where they lost comrades, and go back and show their families what they did, right? And not all battlefields have the luxury of being preserved. Some
Sure.
can never be, some you can never go back to, but I think it's good to honor veterans for what they do, because sacrifice is kind of key to upholding freedom. When I was young, I used to think that freedom was a thing that was given, right? It was a thing that, you know, people with power gave to you. And then I got into my 20s and I learned differently that
Right.
that freedom is a thing that has to be fought for, that you have to stand up and take it, because it will not come to you naturally. And now in my 40s, I think differently again. And I realize the only way you actually get freedom and maintain it is you die for it.
Mm.
You don't actually like get to experience it yourself. You sacrifice your blood, your treasure, your sometimes even your other principles, so that future generations can benefit from it. And that's the real way all kind of lasting evolutions of freedom have come, is through tremendous sacrifice. And I think remembering it is important. Remembering who died for it and where they died for it is instrumental, vitally instrumental in maintaining it.
What do you think about what I'm about to say? The way we treat this ground tells us more about how we feel about ourselves than anything else. In other words, if we valued our own stories, if we valued our own lives, not the viability of our lives, but the quality of life that we have, the things that we are accomplishing as individuals and as generations in our lives, if we valued that and thought our stories mattered, then maybe we would take better care of this ground where these stories played out on, because we would have respect for what they did, because we have respect for ourselves. Am I being too hokey there? Or do you think that's kind of what's going on here? Is that we kind of just lost everything. Our attitude towards ourselves, our heritage, what we are accomplishing today as living, breathing Americans moving forward into the future, whatever it is we're doing, as a whole, as factions, whatever. We just don't really value it. We have a very nihilistic way of looking at things.
The Civil War is no longer in our rearview mirror. It's passed long ago enough that we don't have interaction with those generations or the people that did afterwards. I think the connect there was from 1864 for 50 years. The battlefield was constructed, envisioned and paid for in many instances by the veterans themselves. What they created here, they put into our trust to maintain our memory, take care of our monuments so people can read them, know what we did here. And I don't know if people have that kind of
connection to it, yeah.
Maybe as much anymore. Some of us certainly do.
Yeah.
But
right, but fewer and fewer as the years go on.
People come to Gettysburg for many different reasons now. It's not like it was even 20 years ago, I don't think.
That's very true. That's very true. This is becoming less and less a historic town, and it's like a historic-ish town, where it's like almost for the style of going to a historic town, the quaintness of the whole thing, and the history be damned. Go ahead, Tim. Or was that Peter? Go ahead, Tim. Go ahead. Let Tim go.
I'll jump in. I think what you say is largely true. I think it's very reflective of ourselves, because I think Gettysburg's evolution as a park, from 1863 on to today, has gone through different phases, right? Like if we had a time machine, we could go back, you would see a very different battlefield. If you went back in 1966 versus 1933 versus 1888, the battlefield would look different and the message you'd get from it would be very different. So I think it is about the generations that become the custodians of the battlefield and how they view it and how they interpret it. My biggest fear is that in modern times, the younger generations, and I apologize, is going to sound like a cranky old man
Join the
statement
club.
for a little bit, that younger generations don't appreciate the discipline of history as much as they used to. And I find this is generally a problem in my classrooms. We have fewer and fewer history majors. They don't see it as a profession that is necessary for civilization survival. And therefore, they don't put value on other historic things that require protection, like historic landscapes. And I don't know what really accounts for this, but one of the things we might suggest is that nowadays people value more and more the legacy of what they leave online, right? This is how we connect with each other. This is how we express ourselves and our emotion, but we don't think of ourselves as connected to a physical landscape as much anymore. We think of it connected to an online landscape. And so if we continue to push this idea of social media and online connectivity over the actual message of getting outdoors and experiencing history, the environment, culture, by going to music concerts, seeing ball games, walking trails, ascending massive heights, going to historic houses, walking in the footsteps of people, of animals, of the natural world that has come before us. If we don't push that message, I think there is a danger that all of these things that the federal government has tried to protect, whether they are natural parks or they are historic parks, they could all wind up in a state of neglect. And I guess that's the thing that alarms me most about the beaver problem, is that Gettysburg has had a reputation for being one of the most preserved historic parks.
Yeah.
It is the unblemished Civil War battlefield, right? It is, and I hate to say it, it's the Civil War battlefield that all other Civil War battlefields wish they were.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
Gettysburg envy. And the fact that there is this horrible devastation of the Plum Run Valley is just a shocking thing to me, because this is not the battlefield that should have it, right? It's not the battlefield that should be suffering from this problem.
Correct. The whole situation frustrates me because, and Cindy will tell you this, I'm the type of guy that when there's a conflict, I want to resolve it. And if it's a conflict between two other people that I know, I want to pull everybody together and say, all right, what's going on? This is also stupid, and I'm hungry. Let's stop fighting. And I wish we could just get a group of historians who are, let's say, pro-history instead of anti-beaver, and the Park Service to sit down and really hash this out. Because, and I'll tell you why, because I mostly interact with the interpretive staff over at the park, and I think they're fantastic. I love what they put on. They're just, I get along with them very well. And of course, Jason comes on the show. I know that they have jobs to do, right? They're like anybody else. They have a job to do. They do not make the policy. They enforce the policy. Although the CFR seems to give the superintendent a lot of leeway. And as we've said before, there's things they enforce now that have always been on the books that they didn't enforce 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And it's all at the discretion of the super, right? But I think it feels to me like this policy of letting everything go back to nature is imposed on them from above. I don't know where I get that from, but it just doesn't seem to be in line with what this place is supposed to be. And I can't believe that somebody who's working here every day would be like, who cares what it's supposed to be? Let it just go. Right? So I feel like somebody above our people here is saying, no, this is what I want you to do. Your thoughts? Is it a little too crazy sounding?
I might pass this off to Jen first and
Jen?
see what she
I have no
thinks.
I can't say
Well, none of
that's
us
true
can.
or not. So
It's just a feeling.
the regional Park Service director oversees like 80 some parks in this region. So
So we'd have to see if this is happening in other parks.
yeah, I mean, I can't really
Right.
speak to that specifically.
Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, because I want to, what you were saying before. Like Gettysburg is completely different than any other park. I mean,
Yes,
the
it is
amount of
different.
people you have there just to go there. I mean, it would be like the Yellowstone. It's just a star park. You go to another park and then you just go around and see what's going on and ask the people why they come here. A lot of them come here or like certain sites. They'll go. It's a good place to ride their bike. It's
Yeah.
a good place to walk their dog. It's nothing to do with history. Absolutely nothing. When they find out some history going on there, they're like, "Oh wow, I never." No thought whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is that we have a lot of first world problems, and we haven't had it hard enough to relate to what people went through, what people go through, to fight for something like that and to suffer. And so it's become, we've become very muted to it, or not muted,
Numbed?
still to it. Yeah, numbed. Yeah, we just don't. We can't be like, It's just we're too far gone, and we're more concerned with walking our dog or just walking.
Well, and
It's
also
not
I think
the
that
sacrifice that they made.
the only thing that a lot of people have maybe ever heard of related to the Civil War is a reenactment, and they think they're kind of goofy. And so it's kind of become cartoon. And with all due respect to you reenactors, but the way the general public sees them, I don't think they see them the same way as the history people see them. I think the general public sees them as like, who are these dorks running around in the costumes, swinging their swords? Where, and they don't see it.
It's funny that you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny you say that too, because when I did Civil War reenacting, it was kind of taken more seriously. But
By the
now I
reenactors.
see it, and it's yeah. But now I see it, and it's a real joke. It's like it's actually taking steps backwards.
So you're saying,
Which
but amongst the reenactors, it's taking steps backwards.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's gotten really kind of hokey, LARPy kind of feeling.
Well, but that's the generation that's coming up, is they lived in a fantasy world through their entire childhood and teens, and they're carrying it into their adulthood. I've never known so many male comic book fans before in my life. Are you one of my? I mean, not male, adult male comic book fans.
I read them as a child.
As a child?
Yeah.
But you're not dressing up as Spider-Man anytime soon.
Not recently.
Tim, you?
Yeah.
What, comic books?
Are you dressing up like Spider-Man anytime soon?
Oh, no.
Okay,
no,
good.
no.
Okay. Peter, thank you very much for the call. I got to go and see if there's somebody else.
No
Then we got to let everybody go here. And okay, there isn't. If you want to call in, 717-420-1978. You can give us a call before we end here. But anything you want to add there, Tim?
Well, I think my go-to is always Abraham Lincoln, right? I think, the words he said in the Gettysburg Address, I think are apropos for our current problem, right? He said that, the men living and dead who struggled here have consecrated this land far above our poor power to add or detract. And we have to remember that their sacrifices is what made this ground sacred.
Right.
And he said it is for us, the living, rather, to be here dedicated to the unfinished work which they have so far advanced. And I think that means more than just completing the Civil War and extending the freedom to all people. It also means preserving the legacy for what they died for, which means preserving the ground. And so I think that is Lincoln's charge to us, to future generations, to be the custodians of this important resource, Gettysburg National Military Park. So I think if we don't do our utmost to correct all the problems, beavers included, we're failing the charge that he gave us.
Well, how? Let me push back on you there, because I said I would. He said something. What does he say? Nothing we can do or say here can add or detract from what they did here.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Does that include beavers? Does that include letting the beavers? No matter if we let it go back to nature, that still doesn't take away what they did, according to old A. Lincoln. Your thoughts?
That is true, but my worry is that if the ground is destroyed or submerged, we forget what they did here, and if we forget, then what was the point of it all?
So, in other words, well, Jen, what do you think about that?
What was your question?
Oh, geez, Jen, are you thinking about like
We're going to the
Montezuma's
east.
or something?
Yeah. No, I think that historians have done good work on war's impact on the environment, right? We cannot overstate the fact that war is inherently cruel, and the landscape, man-made and otherwise, have been, in many cases, irrevocably changed, right? War is cruel and you cannot refine it. But I share a lot of Tim's concern, too. Like, this is happening at the nation's most cherished battlefield. More people come to visit Gettysburg than any other Civil War park. Why they come here might be a different sort of question. But the fact that this happens here should be alarming. If Gettysburg is the crown jewel, this should, cause some attention. It's not an obscure second-tier battle or battlefield. So, and I think, too, that the history of the battlefield has its own life. I've spent a lot of time studying that for the last 160 whatever years of Gettysburg battlefield history. We're here just for a small sliver, right? A small sliver in time that we are charged as the stewards of this landscape. And in my assessment, the current administration could do better in caring for those resources. In this specific instance, what's going on at Plum Run. And last, I'll just say real quick, the fact that this occurs between, this area, the battlefield, isn't as popular as Little Round Top, right? We all know the story of the fighting there on July the 2nd. It's unfortunately situated between two iconic places, Devil's Den and Little Round Top. And I'm not sure that we really spend a lot of time reading, actually, about that fighting there or studying the Pennsylvania reserves and that particular action, which
Absolutely.
is what I like so much about Tim's piece is how he's personified 3 men who fought and received their mortal wound in this particular area. But maybe it will encourage some people to do a little more reading on the action at Plum Run. Maybe we'll become a little bit more familiar with McCandless and the Pennsylvania reserves to study why that particular terrain is so meaningful. And maybe that will inspire people who are apathetic or at least content to let the beavers be, let the beavers be, maybe to switch their opinion a little bit on that.
Well, I think we must. If we're going to bitch about the land being obscured by the water, then we must continue to add to what Tim has started here and tell the story of the men who fought and died there. Because you're right. Like, very few people... The Pennsylvania Reserve, Eric, the producer who used to be part of this show, he loves the Pennsylvania Reserves, and he's the guy who he'll say, no, they saved Little Round Top, not Joshua Jesus Chamberlain.
Yeah, the Pennsylvania Reserves are like one of the most battle-hardened units in the entire division, in the entire Army of the Potomac. That's the unit George Meade comes up with. So imagine a scenario where beavers are inhabiting, I don't know, the fields of Pickett's Charge or in front of the Lee Monument or someplace that's a little more, meaningful to a cross-section of the American public, might generate a different response.
What about you, Mike? What do you think about that?
It's not the sexy side of Little Round Top, is it?
No.
I don't know. You've been up there maybe a little bit more than me since it's reopened. Do they interpret the charge of the Pennsylvania Reserves from the north end over there at all? Is it on the big painting?
I can't tell you because, frankly, I always just go up to the summit. I haven't even gone to the north end yet, and I guess that's the point, right? Like, but I would hope so. I don't know, and I'm sorry. I now I feel
now I want to go up and look. And when
I would imagine the interpretation they did is very good. I think it's very thorough. They put a lot of thought into it. I can't imagine they didn't. I feel like they did. And I feel like they might have even done it up by the side. Mike, are you back there? 6 questions. Debbie, you guys back there? Do you know the answer to this question? Wake them
I
up.
don't think they've done any interpretation for that.
For the Pennsylvania reserves? No, I don't think so.
Oh, really? No, Jen?
I don't think so. And spending the time up there looking over their exhibitry, and I didn't see any attention to
It's
that.
certainly not an
All right,
insignificant action. They suffered 230 plus casualties in that action. It's one of the culminating moments of the second day's battle. And I think Tim will confirm that Company K, Gettysburg's own, who have a monument downtown, are in the Pennsylvania Reserve. They fight on that land.
Yeah.
They deserve the attention.
Yeah.
They deserve the same attention that the 20th Maine gets, or the 140th New York, or any of the others.
Tim, I feel like I missed it. Did I read it, all three guys? No, I only did
No,
two.
you're missing O'Hara, 40th
O'Hara.
New York guy.
Right.
Yeah.
Why am I not finding
Guy in the
him?
middle.
All right, guys, keep talking. I'll
A
find it.
touching letter he writes before he dies.
Oh, damn it. And of course, I'm not finding it on the page here. Well, go ahead. Do you want to add to that, Tim, what they're saying while I'm looking here?
Yeah, well, my little post was called Three Men Killed Above Water. It's just three stories. And when we kind of calculate it all, there's probably about 7,000 Union soldiers that fight on this flooded land at various points during July 2nd. And also the next day, July 3rd, there's plenty of skirmish action along that part of the line. And then add in maybe 2,000 or 3,000 Confederates that crossed that ground. So we're talking about, a sizable portion of both armies that fight on this land, right? And it's a historically significant part of the park.
Yeah.
And I reiterate, just kind of what I said earlier. Like if we let this go under, then it kind of opens the floodgates, no pun intended, to any other sacred ground that we might lose for any other reason, man-made or otherwise. So it's important that we draw the line here, right? And I think it's incumbent upon your listeners, the people who care about it, to kind of make their opinions known. The National Park Service needs to know how you feel about this. The only way change is going to occur, and that when you protest in whatever way you do it, be kind and be gentle about it. Don't be a internet troll by any means.
Right.
But go out and let people, the superintendent especially, know that this ground is important to you, right?
Senator Casey, tell him too.
Yeah,
Bob Casey.
Right. We have this government for a reason.
Right.
So we can express our opinions on what we believe is important.
Sergeant Daniel O'Hara belonged to Company G, 40th New York. That's the Mozart Regiment down there in the valley. He was hit by an artillery fragment that pierced his right lung during the 40th New York's retreat from Plum Run Valley. His comrades carried him to the rear. He ended up at the Jacob Schwartz farm, where surgeons informed him that his wound was mortal. Fearing the end was nigh, O'Hara wrote a short letter to his parents. He concluded, "Do not weep for me. Though I may no longer be with you in this world, I shall watch over you until we meet again. I die for our flag and the Union I have learned to love so much that death. Even death cannot quell it in my heart. Farewell from your ever-loving son, Daniel." O'Hara died on July 8th. He was 22 years old. So,
also an Irish immigrant. So he had only been in the United States for about, half his life.
So, there you go. An immigrant died for the country, and his monument is near being flooded again. It kind of looks like those beaver deceivers aren't deceiving the beavers as well as they used to. It might be that they figured it out, and I swear I saw one that was clogged. So I don't know if they did it or if that was just natural from the water, doing it, nature just doing its thing. But anyway, I got to tell you, I don't envy Chris Heister having to deal with all of this nonsense. I don't envy anybody at the Park Service having to deal with this. I know a lot of people within the Park Service are frustrated by it. They don't like it. They don't make the decisions. And and they have to deal with people, and and it's hard for them because they've got to say, yeah, well, they toe the company line and all that. So I feel bad for them. I would not want to be in their position because, and I see the comments online, and they just sometimes just get downright nasty, and it shouldn't be a personal thing. You're right. They're not policy makers. They're enforcing the policy that is given to them. There are some choices, of course, but it's still not it shouldn't be a personal thing, and I don't like that part of it, but whatever. That's how we are. We're silly that way when it comes to this stuff. But Tim, I want to thank you for writing the article and for giving us your time tonight. I hope you're not as hungry as we are.
No, it's my pleasure. And I ate before we began. So.
See, you were smart.
Yeah.
Like a normal
I
person.
hope you guys have a good meal.
Thank you. Jen, Mike, any final words from you that you want to throw out there, either one of you?
I don't have anything to add. This was fun. Hopefully your listeners found it useful. It was nice to share the stage with Michael and Tim and have this conversation.
Yeah.
It was great. So thanks for having us on, Matt.
You're very welcome. Thanks for doing it. And thanks. Let's just give a round of applause for Mike for his first time on the show. He was always so shy, but we said you're doing it and you have no choice. Anything in the back there from the peanut gallery before we go? Mike, Debbie, or Cindy, any thoughts? Everybody's okay, great. All right, well, that's it for us here, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for watching. If you watched, I don't even know if we had any viewers, but obviously Peter did. Thank you for calling in, Peter, Tim, Jen, Mike. Thank you. And you guys have yourself a great night. We'll see you tomorrow on our regular AG Today, and our guests will be Bo Brinkman and Chris Webb talking about Cinema Under the Stars. So we'll see you then. Good night.